Hi, my name is Nora Weber. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in sociology at Indiana University in Bloomington. I study education and inequality. And my role in the Indiana Grad Workers Coalition, United Electrical Workers, it largely involves outreach and communications.
My name is Anne Kavalerchik. I am a third-year PhD student in Sociology and Informatics at Indiana University. In the coalition, I'm on the coordinating committee, and I also do some stuff with our data organization.
I'm Molly Orr. I'm a sophomore at Kenyon College. I work at the Kenyon Farm and in the Writing Center. And in Casewalk, I am mostly a field organizer.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. All right, gang, we've got an important unscheduled episode that we're putting on your feeds this week. We do have one final installment of our special series focusing on teachers and organizers in Wisconsin 10 years after the devastating passage of Act 10. We had that scheduled for this week, but we pushed it back to next week because we got some important and timely struggles that we want to highlight for y'all. And we're going to do that today with the amazing guests that you just heard from. We are also working to try to put together another mini cast for this week, fingers crossed, with folks from the Amazon Labor Union out in Staten Island. I myself am going to be up there this weekend for the Real News Network. You guys probably heard they are holding a rally ahead of the second union election in that Staten Island complex, this time at the LDJ 5 sortation center. So those votes are going to be counted next week. There is a rally happening this Sunday. So I'm going to be going up there and keep your eyes out on the Real News for the interviews that come out of that. But like I said, we're also going to try to get a podcast, a mini cast up to sort of make sure folks know what's going on with this election and how they can show support. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Today, as you heard, we've got Nora, Anne, and Molly here for what I think is a really important discussion about two crucial struggles going on in higher education. You guys know this is something that is very near and dear to our hearts. And we talked with, Columbia graduate student workers who are on strike in the fall. I recently spoke with non-tenure track faculty at Howard University as they prepared for their strike and finally got a tentative agreement from the university administration after nearly 4 fucking years after they voted to unionize. But anyway, I digress. The point is, you probably have heard that graduate workers at Indiana University in Bloomington are on strike as we speak, as are student workers at Kenyon College. And so we wanted to make sure first that y'all knew about these important struggles, what's going on, what's happening on the ground, and how we can show solidarity. But we also thought this was a great and important opportunity to bring folks from each respective school on here to sort of be in conversation with one another. And I think that that's really exciting, really important, and I'm incredibly grateful to Nora, Molly, and Anne for making time for this because obviously they've got a lot of other shit going on. And so again, thank you all so much for doing this. And that's my spiel. I know that time is of the essence. And so what I wanted to do, kind of in typical working people fashion, before we sort of dig into the meat of these respective strikes, I was wondering if we could kind of go around the table and get to know a bit more about you three, the kind of work that you do at Indiana and Kenyon, the things that you study, and maybe how you yourself got involved in the union efforts.
Sure, so I can go ahead. This is Nora. So I study education and inequality within the sociology department. And as my work on campus, I teach a graduate level statistics lab. And I also am the assistant director of the IU sociology lab, which does experimental work. And let's see, I got involved with the coalition about 3 years ago. I'd actually been having conversations with some friends in the sociology department. And I think a lot of these conversations were happening in individual departments around campus about how bad conditions were getting, how our pay wasn't improving, but the cost of living in Bloomington was going up, and it has continued to skyrocket. And then I heard that, there was a group of graduate workers who were organizing. And so I got involved that way, and I've just been involved ever since. And I've had, what's really nice about the coalition is that we have a pretty flat structure. People are welcome to get more involved as they are interested and available. And so I think what we've seen is over the last 3 years, we've had repeated attempts to come into conversations with the IU administration about what our conditions are like, and what sort of changes we need to be supported and in our work and in our studies at IU. And the other thing is that I would really emphasize is that they are aware of this. They have been aware of how bad our conditions are for many years. They put together a task force in 2018, 2019, which released a 2019 report on the conditions just within one of the colleges on campus, so the College of Arts and Sciences. And they outlined exactly, by their own estimates, how low our stipends are compared to the cost of living in Bloomington. They outlined, what a severe financial burden the fees that we pay are, and how much more precarity this creates, particularly for international graduate workers who have even higher fees. And so, we tried to come into meaningful conversation with them. But it was very clear, that they did not have a plan for action, and they did not have, at the college level, didn't have support from the IU administration, so from the university administration, to move things forward. And since then, what we've seen are just a series of basically making cuts in departments cutting fellowships, cutting things like that, in order to try to improve our wages. But no additional money coming in from the university level, or very, very little money coming in at the university level. Meanwhile, again, things continue to get worse. And a lot of the conditions that were raised and that they identified in 2019 have not been addressed.
Yeah, Anne, I guess you can pick this up. So basically, they did an audit and they were like, "Yeah, you guys are fucked." So like nothing. Yeah. I mean, and I guess, Anne, could you pick up on that and maybe say a little more about those fees, because I know that's a really important issue that maybe folks outside of higher ed don't see.
Yeah, and that's a perfect place, because that's also really how I got involved with the coalition. So right when I'm a third year now, and right when I came into Indiana University, they had launched their End the Fees campaign. So one of the most burdensome things that of our working conditions is that every single semester we have to pay what are called mandatory fees. These fees are $700 a semester. For international students, it's an additional $350 a semester. For students in the Jacobs School of Music, which is actually our top department and one of the top or one of the top music departments in the entire country or the world, they have to pay an additional $2,000 or $1,000 a semester. I forget which one. So this is so every single year these fees go up. In addition to that, cost of living goes up. But in the past 10 years, most graduate students at Indiana University have received 2 raises. Some have had 1, many have had 0. Right. So in reality, given the cost of living, given the extreme, exponential growth of these mandatory fees, we just basically receive pay cuts every single year. To speak more about these mandatory fees, one part of them is the repair and rehabilitation fee that was introduced as a temporary fee in, I think, 2014, and has since then increased. So we're paying to kind of repair the asbestos in the walls that we teach. Another is the technology fee. So that's that's the equivalent of that technology fee presumably goes into the screens and the canvas that are kind of the technological infrastructure that we use to teach and research and do our jobs. So we're paying to do our jobs. So in the time that the coalition had just launched this really, really massive petition to end these fees, it kind of concluded with a demonstration and a march. And that's sort of when I became involved in the coalition. There's a lot that's happened in the past couple of years, but basically we formed a union in the past. We decided to form a union around last summer because we realized that in order to finally get rid of these fees and also to address a host of other issues, including actually getting a livable stipend with cost of living adjustments, having fairness for international graduate students, because as of now they pay more money than we do. Their pay is docked further than our pay is, and then also having an effective grievance procedure, independent arbitration, something that we don't really have right now, which is our platform. But to speak more about that COAS report, I call it the COAS report because it was published by the College of Arts and Sciences. But that task force, found very empirical, very, very sort of self-evident results that we are not paid enough. And to go further into that, one of their things that one of the lines in the COAS report, which they actually never released that report themselves. The only reason that people can see their report is because our organization did the equivalent of filing a FOIA request for it. And we, I think when we received it, it was missing some appendices. But on one of the lines of the report, it says that graduate students turn to activities such as taking on second and third jobs and selling their biofluids. So it is a very well-known fact across, I think, every administrator it should be, that graduate workers are routinely donating plasma, turning to all these kinds of extra side gigs, basically, just to be able to kind of afford the cost of living in Bloomington. So it is very, very, very well known what our conditions are, but there has been very little action on them. And in fact, actually just last week or yesterday or something, the university kind of hilariously announced that they would be forming a task force on graduate education. So as a repeat, in 2018, they announced a task force on basically graduate education. In 2019, that task force found that graduate workers were selling their biofluids. It didn't take until, honestly, the strike vote in 2022 for them to actually say that they would kind of meet the recommendations made by that 2019 task force. So clearly what we do not need is another task force. I don't think anyone listening to this probably thinks that we do. But that's kind of our push for unionizing and where the fees, the end of fees ties into it.
Man, so I had myself muted, but expletives were flying on this end because, again, as listeners know, right, this is on top of the other standard bullshit that, graduate student workers go through, and not just graduate student workers, right? But I've talked about this for many years on the show, right? Like the fact that you get paid for basically 9 months out of the year, and you got to figure out what the hell you're going to do over the summer. Even though you're still expected to work and research and whatnot, that's kind of just a built-in feature of the carnival-esque funhouse that is, graduate student work. You get royally fucked on taxes if your money is coming from fellowships instead of like teaching appointments, because they are taxed differently. I found that out the hard way. The fee thing just blows my mind. Because think of it in any other context, right? Because I think, and you mentioned that, the example you gave was Canvas, right? This kind of online portal that everyone uses to do their work, communicate with students, assign stuff, grade, post grades, whatnot. That's like charging, I used to work at a pizza place, right? That's like charging the guys making the pizza an oven fee. What sense does that possibly make, or a firefighter paying for the hoses that they use? Like, this is just asinine. And so no wonder y'all are on strike. Shout out again to the Indiana Graduate Workers Coalition, United Electrical. So we're going to talk more about the strike itself in a minute. But Molly, I want to toss things over to you and ask if you could walk us through what you were doing over there at Kenyon and how you yourself got involved with the Kenyon Student Workers Organizing Committee, also affiliated with United Electrical.
Yeah, so KSWOC, as we call it, has been active and organizing for 2 years now. April 2020 was when things started, and it was really in response to COVID happening. But personally, I was a senior in high school at the time. I'm a sophomore here at Kenyon now. So it was before my time, and I came into Kenyon, and I didn't get a job my first year. So I've been involved in organizing efforts here personally for the fall semester and this semester. But Case-Walk really started as a petition when everyone got sent home in March or April of 2020 to just pay all student workers for the remainder of the semester, regardless of whether their work could happen remotely or whatever other circumstances. And that was successful. And then over the summer, I think that sort of sparked the idea of some more collective action. Over the summer, our community advisors, which are like RAs at Kenyon, had safety concerns about being asked to return to campus and fulfill their duties during COVID. And so there was some organizing around that. They won a pay raise, which then a year later got taken away. But that's sort of the roots of Case-Walk. And then last spring, while I was studying remotely for the semester, Case-Walk went on strike once for one day over unfair labor practices, and then once at the end of the semester for 2 weeks with the demand of Kenyon holding a community election, because Kenyon rejected our request for voluntary recognition in December of 2020, and then twice rejected our request for a community election. And at that point, we were not able to file with the NLRB for an election because the Trump NLRB was not receptive to undergraduate organizing. So it wasn't until October of 2021, 5 months ago, that we were finally able to bypass Kenyon and not depend on asking them politely for recognition of a community election. And we filed directly with the NLRB with over 60% of the workforce signing cards. And then didn't hear back from the NLRB actually until today, because Kenyon chose to hire Jones Day, which are these union-busting lawyers who are notorious for working with the Trump in Pennsylvania, trying to overturn the results of the election, Fox News, good cast of characters for Kenyon to associate itself with. But Jones Day has been filing petitions and motions with the NLRB to delay our election for 5 months. So we just heard back today that we have a hearing date for the election, but we'll probably get into that later. So that's sort of the course of the campaign at Kenyon. We are organizing for a wall-to-wall union, so there are a lot of different shops. Student employment at Kenyon is really diverse, and people do a lot of different kinds of jobs, but we're organizing to represent all of those shops under one union affiliated with the United Electrical Workers.
Hell yeah. And what a serendipitous moment. We were joking before we started recording that the NLRB knew that we were recording this podcast, so that's why they finally got back to Case-Walk. But
absolutely.
Well, and Molly, to pick up on that before I toss things back to Nora and Anne, like, I think this is a really important question to sort of flesh out for listeners, right? Is that breadth of student workers and graduate workers, right? Just the different types of folks doing different types of jobs on these campus communities. This is part of one of the reasons why it can be so difficult, right, to build consciousness, let alone sympathy for the academic labor movement, is because people have such deeply entrenched ideas of what a college campus looks like, who goes there, what goes on there, yada, yada, yada. So could you say a little more, I guess, about that breadth of student workers at Kenyon and what it means to be part of a wall-to-wall union?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's something really important that you bring up, this idea of what kind of person is a student at Kenyon in the first place. We just recently found out that tuition next year has been raised to $80,000. So this is an institution of extreme privilege on the one hand, but to characterize all students here that way is obviously not true. And there's sort of a gap between, there are people here who pay full tuition. There are also people here who are on full rides. There are people who have a lot of aid. And that's also like Kenyon has initiatives to be intentional about that. But just getting those students to campus is a good step, but it's not the whole story. And student workers are more, low-income students are more likely to be student workers. So the workforce is, talking about the workforce is not the same as talking about the student body as a whole. And so we do represent more low-income students than just the general population. We also represent a lot of international students. And I mean, I work 2 jobs. I work in the Writing Center and at the Kenyon Farm, which is a student-run farm, 10 acres. And it's like a 10-minute walk from campus. And those 2 jobs are vastly different. I work 10 hours at the farm, like planting and clipping the goats' hooves, and doing a lot of like hands-on labor. And then in the Writing Center, I like sit at a desk in the library for a couple hours a week and help people with their papers. So those things are very different, but there are a lot of unifying issues on campus. Like a big thing that affects all student workers is the tier system for pay, which basically at Kenyon you can make one of 3 wages, and one is Ohio's minimum wage. And then one is like $1 more than that. And then the next is $1 more than that. So the range is from $9.30 an hour to $11.94. And the sorting, the determination of who makes what is almost entirely arbitrary. We've had a lot of different shops do delegations to their management asking for a raise based on just needing to be paid more, deserving to be paid more, but also based on the written classifications and the descriptions of what kind of work merits what kind of pay. And the responses to those delegations are totally inconsistent. Sometimes it's like, yeah, sure, whatever, tier 3. And sometimes it's like, well, don't conflate money with value. We value you, but so that's an issue that unifies a lot of student workers here. But it's also a challenge to have a wall-to-wall unit where different shops have vastly different experiences. And we've found that the best way to approach that is just by having strong shop structures, and just shop meetings, spaces that people who work in the same workplace can specifically talk to each other, identify their own issues. And those are the most productive conversations that we've had come out of very workplace specific organizing. And it's also a great way to develop leadership in all across campus in different shops.
Hell yeah, man. I feel like such a dumbass for not doing anything remotely this important when I was an undergrad. I mean, but again, listeners know my story. I came to college a very conservative person with no real labor consciousness, but it definitely does my heart good to hear about more students really taking up that struggle and fighting the good fight, like Molly and everyone at K-SWAC, which is, yeah, that's incredible. And to kind of sustain that energy, like you were saying, from, trying to get voluntary recognition. No, okay, then we're going to try to get an election, and we're getting stonewalled. Well, we're going to appeal with the NLRB. Like, that's another really impressive thing that I don't want to be lost on listeners, because if you all remember, some of the other episodes we've recorded on the academic labor movement point out that there are a lot of built-in barriers to sustaining organizing at when you are involved in education. The biggest and most obvious one being you have a big 3-month block in the summer that administrators love to use to sap that energy. They basically keep delaying and delaying until everyone breaks for summer, and they hope that all that energy is going to dissipate. So kudos to y'all for keeping that energy up. And Nora and Anne, I wanted to kind of toss things back to y'all and to kind of pick up on that. You touched on this a bit, right, about the kind of breadth of graduate workers involved in the coalition. But I guess I wanted to ask if you could talk about that a bit more and the issues that are really central that brought you to the point of this strike. And also if you could explain a bit, because I'm sure listeners are trying to understand, they're like, wait, why are graduate workers at a public university being forced to strike for union recognition? So if you could talk a little bit about that and give folks some kind of context for the strike.
Yeah, so the strike that's happening right now at IU is of people on SAA or student academic appointments. And this is just to say that that's what our contract is called. So again, it's an employment contract with the university, but we are listed as SAAs. And this is for the classes we teach, etc. Right now, the people that are actively on strike from and withholding labor are people who are associate instructors, so people who teach classes, and then people who are support instructors, so grad workers that do grading and office hours and all of these other parts that, if they are not the primary instructor for the course, to still support and are critical to the course running. And we are also being supported by people who are on administrative SAA appointments. And those are people who work for journals on campus, who work in centers on campus, et cetera. But who, again, their work, is very visible and critical to the day-to-day running of the university. We also have people who are on research or fellowship, some of whom are on, so some of the research is on SAA appointment, because some of that is tied to their individual academic progress. Those people are not striking from their research activities, but they are participating in the strike by not stepping in to do any of the instructional or administrative labor that happens on campus.
Yeah, and then so also to clarify what our bargaining unit is, Nora already touched on it, but there are about 2,500 graduate students. They're primarily PhD students, but there are also master students who are on what IU calls student academic appointment contracts. And so these are Nora described these jobs. Most of these people hold some kind of instructional position. Many of them teach their own courses. Many of them do the grading or the proctoring or many other instructional roles. Some of them are research roles, but these are people who are working far more than full time to fulfill not just the conditions of their employment, but also to fulfill all the other expectations that we that we have in terms of research and coursework and et cetera. In terms of the issues that brought us to the strike, well, last semester I mentioned our bargaining unit is about 2,500 people. Last semester we collected over 1,600 union cards. This semester we've collected several hundred more. We have around 1,750 or so now. IU has a policy in place that is called HR 1220. Which is the policy for forming an employee organization on campus, essentially a union. This policy says that an election will be triggered if that organization collects 30% of the bargaining unit has petitioned for a union election. Well, 1,600 union cards out of 2,500 people, that's well over 30%. That's well over 60%. And IU has refused to allow us to hold a union election. So that's kind of how we got to this point of striking for union recognition. I'm not as familiar with labor history as I would like to be, but what we are doing is very historic. Doing this, in a state like Indiana, even though the Midwest has a very great history of labor organizing. But what we're doing right now really shows that even when there are a lot of things against you to organize in a public university and also in a right to work state. But basically what we have is we have mass power. We have a huge number of people in our bargaining unit. We've also built huge supports across campus, across different unions on campus, across the faculty, across the undergraduates, across staff, et cetera. And so what we're really doing is we're pushing the administration to realize that everyone wants them to recognize us as a union. And that's why we're on strike, to show that, they use the argument against us that they use it, that higher ed, places of higher education use against striking graduate workers or other academic workers. And that's the excuse that you're not workers, you're students. Well, when we're on strike, when we're disrupting the university, when classes aren't being held, and when homework isn't being graded, when exams aren't being proctored, when students aren't getting office hours, when administrative offices are closed because they're primarily staffed by graduate workers, it becomes increasingly more ridiculous to continue saying that we're primarily students. And so that's a little bit of the brief history of why we're striking for union recognition in a public university.
Man, yeah, I remember not so fondly hearing very similar things, right? It's like, and this is, again, this is one of the, I guess, again, if folks listening to this are still somewhat hung up on that same question, consider the fact that the National Labor Relations Board itself has flip-flopped on this many times, right? Saying at first graduate students are workers, then they're not, like using kind of these different moving goalposts, right? Like, oh, they're more students than they are workers, even if they are doing work. And, the latest update from the NLRB, if I recall correctly, is it doesn't matter if they're both. What matters is that the university is their employer that sets their hours. There is a worker, an employee-employer relationship there. Thus, they can form a union. But yeah, what Indiana University is doing, basically flouting the laws and procedures allowing workers at public universities to unionize and workers in general to unionize is, frankly, bullshit. That's me talking. I'm, speaking only for myself here. But Molly, I was wondering if we could kind of pick up on that and what Anne was talking about, because I know this has been a big facet of the struggle there at Kenyon, is that more members of the university community have also come out in support of your struggle. And so I wanted to, with the remaining time, ask if we could kind of give folks a sort of, grassroots eye level view of where things stand right now, what actions are happening, what people should be looking out for. And then we'll kind of wrap up by asking what listeners can do to show support for the Indiana Graduate Workers Coalition and the Kenyon Student Workers Organizing Committee.
Yeah, I mean, that student or worker debate hits close to home for us as well. And as you said, we're proving that we're workers by not going to work and causing problems for them. So we actually have a really big week this week because it's the second week of our strike. We came out in waves. So this is an unfair labor practices strike over the administration making unilateral changes to the community advisor position, switching them from a wage to a stipend, and then claiming that they are not considered statutory employees and are not protected under FLSA or any other applicable labor law, which is concerning because that is really vague. Could be the NLRA that gives people the right to collective action. FLSA is minimum wage and overtime protections. So changing this classification is opening the CAs, who have been a very publicly organized shop for the last 2 years. It opens them up to a lot more exploitation if they're not protected under those laws. So that's what the strike is over right now. But we are also really frustrated with the college's 2 years of delays. And we have not gone away in that time. We've gained more support, stronger organization in more shops. And this week, starting tomorrow, a lot of members of our Kenyon's Board of Trustees are going to be visiting campus for their biannual meeting and summit. So we have a big rally tomorrow. And our focus is just going to be on being as visible as possible to these trustees, because these are the people who have been off campus. They haven't had to see any of it happen. And they're the ones that are making the choice to delay and not to let us vote, not to let us have an election, and not to respect our rights as workers. So this is a big week for putting pressure on them. We have heard some rumblings about coming to a possible solution. It's all very vague in the administration. So it's really an indication to us that we ramp up the pressure. We're continuing outreach, getting more people to join the strike from the shops that are out in majority now. And that's what we're doing to sustain the strike. The biggest thing that we need help with is fundraising, so that we can help people meet the needs they have and get them paid for the time that they're on strike. We have a strike fund going to help cover costs for striking student workers, and that's essential to our capacity to sustain the strike as long as we need to. We have 2 more weeks left in the semester plus finals week, and we're halfway through our second week of being out on strike now, and those costs add up over time. We're organizationally putting pressure on the administration, not just from the strike itself, but from alumni. There are several other peer institutions of Kenyons where student workers have been able to organize and the administration has been able to work with them better. So Dartmouth, Grinnell, Wesleyan, our major, and Hamilton College are all peer institutions of Kenyons where the administration has been much more amenable to student workers organizing, and Kenyon is getting some fresh pressure from those institutions, from those successful unions, and that is helpful to us. All of the press we've been able to get is helpful, and all of this combined with the Board of Trustees visiting this week is really the time that we have to deliver our message to them and move ahead.
So we've had an overwhelming amount of support in Bloomington, and it's been really heartening to see that there's only a very small number of people who still feel that unionization is not the pathway forward, and it's the president, the provost, and the Board of Trustees. But we've had so much incredible support. So yesterday we did have our strike authorization vote, which passed with over 1,000 voters, or around 1,000 voters, and over 97% yes to continue. So huge internal support from the members of the Graduate Workers Coalition, UE. Today was our Alumni Day on the picket lines. We had several alumni members speak, and they initiated on their own a petition letter, an open letter to the IU administration that has now over 1,000 signatures and includes over 880 pledges from alumni to withhold donations until they recognize our union. And then tonight, so we're headed off to the Bloomington City Council meeting where they are putting forward a resolution that supports our strike and our unionization, and really contextualizes this in the better well-being of the town, and understanding that, the university's decision to continue to underpay its workers is not just hurting IU, it's not just hurting the students that go there, but it's also hurting the entire local community. So we're really excited about all of that. We've also just had an outpouring of support from faculty endorsements, faculty and department statements of neutrality. The IU student government, which represents both the graduate and undergraduate, primarily student body, has now passed 2 resolutions in support of us, not just of our strike and our union, but also denouncing some claims from the provost that tried to pit undergraduates against graduate workers who are on strike. And yeah, it's just so many various student organizations, our state senator and state representative, as well as local organization in terms of political and labor leadership. So the Southern Indiana Area Labor Federation, AFL-CIO, local transit, Bloomington Transit employees, the Indiana Latino Democratic Caucus. I could go down the line, the Monroe County Education Association, just like a huge number of people that are standing up and saying the money that goes into IU and the work that goes into IU, those should be together. If this is an institution of education, and that's what undergraduates are paying tuition money for, those increases should be seen by the workers on the campus, which is largely graduate workers. So we've also been, just as a final thank you to all of the other graduate worker organizations around the country that have reached out. We have support from, I'm looking at the list here, I think it's 20, maybe more than 20 other graduate worker organizations around the US. And we know, this is not a movement that's just happening in Bloomington. Obviously, it's also a movement that's happening in Kenyon, but it's also a movement that's happening all over the country as graduate workers say, yes, this university runs on our labor, and we have the right to a dignified and healthy living and working conditions while we are here.
And so ways to support us, there's a lot of information on our website, which is indianagradworkers.org. There's basically, there's a drop-down menu that's, if I'm, if you are a graduate worker, if you're an undergraduate, if you are local to Bloomington, or if you're you just want to support us. Obviously, the donating to our strike fund it can be really, really helpful. It kind of will help us. It's really been helpful to just sustain us through, especially increased threats and threats of retaliation from the administration. Then on social media, we're Indiana Grads on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And then also, before I forget, thank you so much for having us on. And also, Molly, it was really lovely to hear about your struggle. And I certainly, as an undergraduate, wouldn't have had really the know-all to get involved in something like that. So I don't think I'm missing anything. But thank you all so much and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.